Thank you for tuning to Wide Eyes, a podcast made to uplift and educate others about the Asian American community. My name is Katie.
I'm new. And this is a new. And so in this episode, we are going to be talking about sex and love. All right, new Katie. So first off, starting with sex. Okay, I have two very big questions. Did you get sex education growing up? And I wanted to get your guys' perspective about sex educations received in the Asian American community.
So first off, homegirl is still a virgin, and that's okay. TMI, but whatever. And in regards to like sex education while growing up, for me personally, I remember I think the two of you might remember this too, but then for me it was like sex education happened in like elementary school when I was in 6th grade. I don't know if it was the same for you guys, but for me it was when I was in 6th grade, and they just explained to us about the private areas and what happens and whatnot, but then they didn't really go into details about like plan B or like having safe sex, you know? And I feel like we should be taught about safe sex because, when kids be going to middle school and high school, they start becoming curious and stuff. And I'm over here like, okay, because I feel like it was like the bare minimum of like sex education being taught to me in elementary school. And I felt like there should have been more. But in regards to like internally within my Asian household, there was no education whatsoever. It was kind of like a silent discussion, but then there was no discussion to begin with. So yeah, I don't know about you guys, but for me, there wasn't really any sex education within my Asian household. It wasn't really talked about till like in between like my parents to me and my siblings, because and my siblings, we have a big generation gap and huge age gap. It wasn't really taught, if that makes any sense.
And you do make sense because my experience similar with yours too. Like I didn't receive sex education till I was in 6th grade as well. Interestingly, I don't know how your guys' school does it, but they separated the boys and girls to different classrooms with different teachers. Like I remember we had like a girl teacher, so the boys had a boy teacher. So that was how it was for me. And I didn't really honestly, I didn't know what sex was at the time. I had like an idea, but like it wasn't very thorough or detailed, but I didn't ask no questions. And for me, talking about like period, right? I was a late bloomer, so I didn't start it until I was in middle school. And honestly, I have no idea what just happened. All I remember was I came home and then, I saw blood on my pants and I was like, what is this? So I asked my mom and she's like, oh, you're in your period. It's a girl thing. And then I was all like, oh, okay. And then all she did was she gave me a pad, and you know what she said to me? Don't get pregnant, Katie. That's all she told me. She didn't give me any like intro to what period was, what to expect, and like a period 101. All it was, don't get pregnant, Katie. And I was like, okay, I guess. But as you can see, I didn't receive the kind of like sex education that children should receive. Yeah, I feel like I can't speak to all Asian families, but I feel like it's pretty like normal for us in the Asian community to not speak upon sex as much, because I feel like it's seen as like, I know with my family, they feel it not weird, but uncomfortable. I want to say it's uncomfortable because they feel like I should know it already. And if I see it, I should understand it. But I want to use the word uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for my mom to speak it to me. So she's more just like, you should know, Katie, don't do that stuff, or be safe or be cautious. That's all she said to me. So for my family, it all ties down to that uncomfortableness of speaking. Like you should know what sex is and you should know what protection is. Yeah, that was my experience. How about you, Anu?
Very similar to both of y'all. And I think it's kind of, Katie, you mentioned like your parents or guardians or just people in general, they just kind of expect you to know it. But it's like, bro, like I don't know what is going on, right? And so you mentioned period, and I feel like as a woman, like your period is what should what's called, it's the start of needing to have sex education, because once you have your period, you have the very real chance of getting pregnant. And so for me, I was in the restroom and I was doing my thing, and then I wiped and there was blood everywhere, and I was just like, oh my god, what is going on? And so I was like, Mom, I'm bleeding. What is going on? And so she came running into the room and she was just like, oh, this is it. Like, oh, don't worry. And she just, gave me a pad. She showed me how to use a pad. And then she just said like, oh yeah, when you're at school and it's like the pad is heavy now, you just need to change it. And so just do exactly what I did and just change it. And so for me, I was in sixth grade. I think I had it fairly young, but I was a sixth grader and blood is spewing from my vagina. And it's just kind of like, you just left me like, just kind of threw me out there, right? And so for me, I was very self-conscious that whole entire day because I didn't know I didn't know how to tell the difference, right? Like, is it full? Is it not full? Like, do I need to change it? Do I not? And so it was just kind of like really weird. And so for me, from my recollection, I didn't have any education about what periods were. And then talking about sex education, like I had nothing. The only thing that my parents taught me, like I guess it was kind of sex education, but not really sex education. But it was just kind of like, don't get pregnant and like just don't have sex until you're ready to like have kids. And it was actually that was basically it. That was basically it. And so very straight to the point. But I think it just lacked in explaining like what is sex. For me, I didn't know what sex was. Like people said it, but it wasn't until I was in like high school and stuff like that, and I learned what sex was. And I think the education system too, which this is this whole topic in general, but I think it's really important to have sex education in school because for most traditional family like me, like I didn't get any of that. And so to have the school system like also not teach you like I don't know if y'all had like I saw the closest thing I had to sex education was in my biology, not even in the sex education. It was a biology course, and we just saw a woman give birth. That was the most sex education, like I guess it was their way of saying like, you know, giving birth is painful, don't have kids. But yeah, so that was the most of what I had as a sex education. And I think knew something of what you were saying, like now you're very open about talking with your siblings and stuff like that. And so for me, like recently my cousin, she, you know, she just recently had her first period, and she didn't know what it was. She came to, okay, another story time. So I was at her house. She goes, and then do you know what a period is? And I'll go, do you know what a period is? And she goes, I don't know. I think so. And so I took her to another room, and I was just like, what do you think a period is? Well, I think it's when you become a woman. And so I was just like, that is very true. That is very true. Is when you become a woman. But she just didn't know what the period itself was. And so she had told me that, you know, she asked her mom what it was, but her mom was saying like, oh, she's too young to know about it. But for me, so that's where I kind of stepped in as the bigger sister, right? Because I wish I had a bigger sister a big sister to tell me what was going on, right? And so I kind of stepped in, and I was just kind of like, yeah, your mom, even though your mom says you're too young to know about this, like I'll tell you about this because it sucked not knowing. Because I just from the questions that she asked me, like she was very, very curious. Oh, what's a pad? What's a tampon? Like all my friends are talking about this. I have no idea what this is. And so I took the initiative to just explain what a period itself was. But for me, it was really important just to let her know, like, this period is, you know, it's a period, it's normal, right? And I let her know, I was just like, yeah, it's gonna come every month. She goes, what? I'm gonna have this every month? And I was like, yeah, girl, you're gonna get cramps and everything. She was like, every month? And I was like, oh yeah, every month. And so I'm digressing just a little bit talking about my cousin, but I think it's really important because for me as a kid, like, I wish I had someone to talk about it with and not have to feel ashamed about, like, you know, learning about what a period is, learning about what sex is, just because, you know, it's a normal human thing. And I think it's important to just be comfortable with this topic because, you know, everyone's gonna go through it. Anyways, with that said, New and Kitty, I was wondering what y'all feel like sex is perceived in the Asian American community, more specifically sex before marriage. I know a lot of, like, I don't know what it is, but like a woman's self-worth is determined on, like, oh my God, like her body count, right? And so for me, I feel like in my experience, more specifically in the Hmong community, right, there's this high value on like purity and going into a marriage and not having, I don't know, 5-10 guys. Is that a lot? Who knows? But yeah, and so I was just wondering how sex is perceived in the Asian American community. Because I feel like even though specifically we are talking about more of the Hmong community, but I feel like this is applicable to all Asian American communities, just because a lot of them hold more traditional values.
I can speak this for myself because growing up in a traditional Asian American or household as well too, sex, like, right, the topic of sex wasn't discussed a lot in my household, but I do know that like my parents were really they emphasized a lot of, like, Katie, like, you know, you shouldn't lose your virginity to just a person you date, like you should lose it, like they really care about the long term. Like, let's say for example, if I just met this dude, they feel as if it's not important for me to lose it to that person. It's more like for them, they value me to lose it for someone that I see a future with. So that was like a really big thing that I had in mind too. And as well as it has to do with, I think I had this conversation before too with New back then in high school. I was very like, I'm only gonna lose it to my one and only person, and I'm gonna marry that person. That was my like perspective. Like I remember saying that clearly, like I'm only gonna lose it to the one I marry because that's gonna help me be pure and all that, right? Because I had that mindset going into even dating or just being in relationships because of how I was being raised. But as I grow older, like honestly, like it's similar to getting a tattoo. I brought this up because before I got a tattoo, I had like a lot of negative connotations or stigmas around it. I thought that getting a tattoo permanent on your body, it means that you're not pure anymore, right? Just like maybe perhaps losing your virginity means you're not pure anymore. But then honestly, after getting a tattoo, I feel like no difference. Like I feel the same. There's nothing different about me. I still feel like myself. I think I feel more empowered, honestly, by getting myself tatted because I feel even more confident within myself. So for me, I apply that to other topics as well too, or like for example, sex, right? So that's my perspective changed throughout the years as I experienced more things and expose myself to different people and talk to you guys, because that helped me open up a lot. How about the both of you?
So for me, in regards to the sex before marriage, I personally feel like my parents did have that, like similar to both of your parents, of the like traditional mindset. And my parents are much older; they're in their like 70s, right? And my siblings and I, we have a pretty huge age gap. So when my siblings would tell me like stories of their experience and how like basically when they go and get married and whatnot, they'll tell me how like our parents before was very much more strict and they were more on the traditional side. But over time, like my siblings did brought it up to me because I've noticed it too, of how I guess you could say that my parents are more lenient in a way of like being more like open minded, I guess you could say. So like they don't say like, oh, you can't have sex before marriage and whatnot. But of course, I know that now that they've gotten older and like with like some of my siblings, like they're not married, but they're staying with their significant partner, right? And my parents, they're not holding that against their own child as if they would have done like I don't even know, like so many years ago. Like I'm like trying to think because I have so many siblings, so I'm trying to think like now. I just personally feel that my parents have become more open-minded and understanding that I guess it's okay to have sex before marriage. I feel like they're more open-minded. I don't know if that makes sense.
And yeah, no, that completely makes sense. And but for me, more from my experience, I kind of similar to yours, knew like they were lenient, but not really. I think for
Yeah.
me, my parents, they're more Americanized because my mom is 1.5 gen. I think it comes more from my mom because I do talk to my mom more about this than I do my dad. But they're more concerned of, like, they respect our decisions and what we do, but I think they're more concerned about making sure that we understand what it means in terms of like your reputation, I guess. I don't know how to put this into words, but yeah, kind of like, obviously there is a stigma with a higher body count, and I think that's what they're trying to protect us from, like to be associated with that negative stigma. I think more so they're more concerned about how the community and how that's going to affect me, because even now, more so of like marriage prospects, I guess. And so I think for me, they're more concerned about like protecting my reputation. But I think in the Hmong community in general and in the Asian American community, I think the reason why sex is looked negatively upon of is just, I feel like a lot of them are because we have a lot of adults who are still in the traditional values. I think after I want to say our parents' generation, even now, I think our generation too, we do have a lot of individuals who hold traditional values. But I feel like as we are progressing and becoming more Americanized, it's just becoming a normal thing. Kind of like, at least for me, my parents always, said like, hey, you want to make sure you know your partner inside and out before you get married, because, what if you go live with them and you don't like that they leave their socks around, and then that could be a deal breaker, because you don't like, one thing leads to another and you find more things that you're like, oh, I don't like this about them, and it can become, it can ruin relationships as small as it is. Yeah, so I just feel like my parents, they aren't too strict about like body count. I think they're more concerned about how the community perceives me, and it comes more from a not something of like wanting up to uphold their reputation, but they want to make sure like I understand like we're still in this time of community and how the community perceives the individual and how that can affect how your in-laws perceive you, how your in-laws family perceives you, and how that could be detrimental to a marriage. And so more so for my sake, yeah. And with that said, kind of talking about like how your family is like really the start of sex education, sex in general, and like how you as an individual receive love. And so, you and Katie, how did your family give you love? How did you receive love from your family? And how does that affect the connections that you make outside of your family?
My immediate like reaction to love, or like how my parents convey their love to me, is in my household, we don't say I love you. And like I love you is like a standard way of expressing your love to your kids, your family, right? Anyone that you cherish. But in my household, we don't say I love you. I think because it's a given, I think they know that I mean, as kids, I should know that my parents love me, right? But then, I mean, you're a kid, so you don't, even though you don't have that knowledge, or you don't know that your parents love you, even though you believe they love you, but you still want to see some sort of uh, expression or some sort of way they show that they love you, right? So I know that for me, I received a lot of like tough love where like my parents, although they don't express it much, they're more of a gift giving person. Like even to this day, my mom, like she just give me stuff. She just hand it to me. She doesn't even tell me the reason why. She just give me stuff. So that's her like way of showing me love. I didn't receive a lot of even like talking about love language, like words of affirmation. Like my parents don't really say, "Oh, Katie, like good job, keep it up, you're doing awesome." They're more just like, okay, yeah, like more like that, very blunt, no words of affirmation, right? But I know that they love me, right? But I didn't know that when I was younger, because you're a kid, so you don't know much. But it, man, I'm trying to think like, whoa, did this affect me deeply? Maybe it did. But with that being said, I know that I had a hard time showing love to people growing up. Oh man, did this do me some damage? Sorry, y'all. We're going to like trauma territory here. But it did, like, for me, I wasn't able to, I feel like, express my feelings as much when I was younger. Like it was really hard for me to like say I love you back to even my family or even to people. And like I didn't really do well with skinship. So like if someone like tried to hug me or like just hold my hands, I'll be like what you doing? Like it was weird for me for people touching me. I know that they're showing me affection, but it was hard for me to accept it because growing up I didn't receive that, right? So when someone does it to me, I feel like, oh, this is like abnormal. Like, it's out of my comfort zone. Like it's different. I know that I had like a hard time kind of like reciprocating that back to people. Like I know, for example, story time, like one of my friend, I remember back in the day, like she was super affectionate and like she really loved hugging people. But I remember like just stepping away, be like, oh, please don't hug me. Like I was very like uptight about it. Like I didn't want no one to be in my personal space. So I think it does tie down to the type of love that I receive too. But this could be a whole nother topic. But now that I grow older, I'm trying to learn to be more just like, even though if it's not love, just express my feelings. Like even if it's not like saying I love you to people, but maybe the way how I feel, like maybe if I'm upset, if I'm happy, if I'm sad, like just learn how to express that. Because when I was younger, it was really hard for me to just express my feelings. Like if I feel angry at someone, like I can't even say that. Like it was so hard for me just letting someone know that, oh, like you hurt my feelings. Like it's super hard for me to say that. But now that I'm older, I feel like it's much easier to say it to someone, like if they did hurt me or maybe they did something wrong to me. And I think it has to do with having younger siblings too, because I have younger siblings. So with me not having that sort of love growing up, I wanted to give my younger siblings a different type of love so that they know and they could do better for themselves. So yeah, that's me. How about the both of you?
So for me, so for the type of love that I received from my family, or like I would like to say like my parents. I feel like growing up or like my whole life, my parents always emphasize that family will always be there for one another. And I do come from a big family, as I am like the 10th child in my family. And then for my parents, especially, they don't like express their love as much. And then like they don't express their love like in talking in a affectionate way, nor do they like provide gift as a way of like expressing their love, right? And there is a pretty big age gap between me and my parents. But as I was oh my god, as Katie was sharing her story, I was like going through like memory lane as like back then as a kid. I remember that for me growing up, I had always like tried my hardest to like express my love to my parents by either giving them hugs or just saying I love you, even though even though they may not understand it, because my parents are much older than me. And despite them like not understanding what love is and how to reciprocate it back, and I don't ask for them to reciprocate it back, as you know, but it's just that for me, like growing up in a household where I felt that I didn't really have time to be a kid, I feel like I had to like grow up or mature much like faster than I expected. But I just felt that how it affects my connection outside of my family is that just trying to understand how people's love language is different, I guess you could say, and how people express love is differently. And learning that from my parents, it made me realize that, you know, even though like it may be harder for them to express themselves, it's okay for me, on the other hand, to try to understand where they're coming from in a sense. And even though the way that they show love may be very completely different from how I understand it, it's okay because we come from very big, like, I don't want to say, like, I feel like there is a generation gap, so I feel like that does play a big factor in it. But it just shows that it is okay to like take your time to be open-minded and understanding that people have different ways of expressing love, and just find a way in between to accommodate.
I feel like it's such, maybe this is me once again thinking too much into this conversation, just like how I thought too much about Katie and her bike in the last episode. But I think for us, it's really hard to put it into words, right? At least for me, it's really hard to put into words how I feel about this topic, just because, like, very similar to you both, like, I didn't grow up with a lot of affection. Hugging was like, ugh. Any form of PD was really ugh. And then, you know, words of affirmation, like, I love you, or like just even really small stuff like, oh, I'm so proud of you, or just like stuff that shows like any sort of like excitement, or I don't want to say excitement, but just like any form of like positive energy was really not there. But then when as I grow older, I really can't say that that's also true too. Kind of like knew what you were talking about, like they perceive love in different ways. And so for me growing up, watching American TV and seeing all these like, you know, mom and dads saying to the children like, oh, I love you and stuff like that, like that's cool too. But like for me, now that I'm older, I think back about like all the lectures that my parents gave me. At the time, I was just like, why are you guys yelling at me? Like, you guys hate me, yada, yada, yada. But like, it was them telling me like, you can do better. What can I do to support you? At least that's how my parents were conveying it to me, more so of, so they weren't really saying it directly, like, I love you, or like, I'm so proud of you. It was mainly them saying like, what can I do more to support you? Or like, what can you do more to support yourself, right? To be better. And I think that was really their way of, you know, because maybe they didn't grow up with a lot of affection, right? Because my parents are refugees, and so they come from a state of survival 24/7. And so for them, the type of love that they gave me, it was there, but I just didn't see it. And so that kind of goes back to like Katie, you had mentioned a little bit about love languages. Like, you know, I think that's why one of my biggest love languages now is acts of service, because, you know, even though my parents, they're very like, they don't celebrate anniversaries, birthdays, Valentine's Day, like none of that. And so it comes more from the philosophy of my dad and my parents are saying like, I'm doing everything that I can every single day to make sure like our family doesn't starve, or to make sure like our kids have the best opportunities that they can to pursue higher education. And so these little minute, that's why I'm not a very big birthday person, and I'm not really big on like holidays and like Thanksgiving and stuff like that, because like every day is Thanksgiving for us, every day is a birthday for us, because, you know, my dad, at least and my mom, they're just kind of like, yeah, like, we're doing the best that we can with what we have to make sure, like, tomorrow is a better day, or to make sure, basically just that acts of service, but doing it every single day. And so like I said, growing up watching TV, like, you see acts of service, but it's not really there. You see more of the gift giving and stuff like that. And so when I was younger, I really loved gifts. Like, that's why I'm such a big gift giver, because that's how I give out love to everyone. But then before, when I was younger, I used to love receiving gifts, because I was like, they love me so much, and they're so, like, "Oh, I'm their best friend," or I'm just so happy because they're giving me gifts, because that's what I saw on TV. But now, like, again, like I said, as I grow older, at least my values have changed a little bit, where I view my parents and how they show their love for each other. And it really comes from acts of service, from as small as, like, waking up in the morning and making a cup of coffee for someone, or for each other. Or for me, coming back, as I mentioned this in the previous, I think last year's episode, yeah, like coming home and having a warm meal on the table ready for me, like, oh. And so, yeah, I don't really know where I'm going with this, but I think it does really affect my relationships outside of family.
Oh, but I did want to ask you guys though, like, does love like matter in the aspect where, let's say, if you're with a friend or significant other and their love language is not the same like yours, would that be a deal breaker?
Okay, I feel like there's pros and cons to it, right? Like, does your love language
Speak on
matter?
it.
And I feel like for some people, they feel like it matters in a way where, for example, let's say that there's this affection, right? Their love language is affection. But what if their significant partner love language is gift giving? I don't know, gift giving. And then one is like physical affection. And then, but the person that likes gift giving doesn't like physical affection. How would that work in a way? I don't even know where I'm going with this. But
Yeah, no.
Oh, I get it.
but I'm thinking about, like, okay, like, it's hard in that scenario, right? But then I feel like, despite having different love language, I feel like being in a relationship, it takes two to make it work. So those two should be open-minded and be respectful of your love language. Like, even though my love language may not be physical affection, and my significant partner, their needs and wants is physical affection, that's their love language. So I think it's appropriate in a way for me to be understanding and be open-minded and learn to accept my partner's love language and display that affection to them. And it's not something that's like, it shouldn't feel like it's a job in a sense, like, oh, I'm required to do this because my partner feels this way, but I don't like it, right? I feel like it should be something where you're doing it in a genuine way, as if because you actually care about this person, right? Because you're in a relationship with someone because the two of you, I don't even know. I'm not even in a relationship. I don't know where I'm going with this.
You're doing good. I will add more to you.
But anyways, that's just my thought process. If it makes any sense, homegirl over here have no relationship whatsoever, but is trying to understand how a relationship works.
It does make sense. I was going to say that you should communicate your needs with your partner. So for example, like you mentioned about gift giving or physical touch, like you should communicate, like maybe if he or she is not giving you as much, I'm just going to say words of affirmation, like affection, like I love you, or oh, you're doing awesome, like, and you want to hear more of that, you should communicate it to your partner and not leave them like just stranded. And then like a month later, you're just so upset. You're like, well, you didn't say I love you, so that's why I'm giving you the cold shoulder. So I feel like that's like not right. Like you should communicate your needs, right? I feel like that's to a healthy relationship. Man, like, oh, I'm not even in a relationship either, but this makes sense. But yes, and I feel like there shouldn't be a lot of like, I don't want to call it sacrifices. I feel like when you're in a relationship, you should compromise, right? Like meet in the middle ground. And I think that's what Anu mentioned about being in the middle ground earlier. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you both. I like that you mentioned communication, Katie. And so I was very curious about this just because it's like, I feel like maybe not leaving love language matter. I think the whole thing about this was communication. Because for me, originally, I was gonna be like, oh, hell yeah, love language matters, right? Like, if he doesn't have the same love languages as me, like, I'm not gonna go I wouldn't necessarily say like it's a deal breaker, like a deal breaker for me. It's like cheating in a relationship is like a no. I can't with that. But like love language is, it's not as polar, like it's not as extreme. There you go. It's not as extreme as like cheating, but it's still like very important because it's a day-to-day thing, right? And so like if my love language, well, it's not if my love language is acts of service, but another high one is physical touch, right? And so if my partner doesn't like physical touch, I think it can build up to be something that can be a problem in a relationship. My non-existent relationship, right? I think all of our non-existent relationship. But yeah, so for me, I think it's important to have communication, like you said, Katie. That was new said too. It takes two to make a relationship work, right? Make it or break it, right? And so it takes two people to do that. And so it's important to like communicate what your love language is. That way, you know, you're validating your partner's experiences and how their feelings and what their feelings are. Yeah, I think love language doesn't necessarily matter now that I think about it, but I think what really does matter is making sure you're communicating with one another to make sure that your feelings are being conveyed and their feelings are being received, to make sure that it's a solid relationship. And so with that said, this wraps up our conversation for the month of February. We can't wait to chat with you all in the next episode. Feel free to check us out on Instagram at Wide Eyes Podcast.